Hello again, and back to circuit sword build, and this is part 4. This is going to be talking about the back side of the case here. So we've already got our front done, that looks good, but now we need to address the back, which this is honestly probably where some of the most work comes in when actually soldering and doing things for the circuit sword. The front is probably where you do most of your case modifications, but the back is just where you have more of the actual hard wiring, even though, I mean, there's hardly any hard wiring in this. So what we need to do is actually get the little sideboard for the Kite circuit sword here, this guy, the power button board, and the back button board, and then we need our connectors, which one is this little connector that connects the power button to the sideboard, and then we need the back board or the back button board connector. Also, we have a slightly longer than factory tactile switch. This is, I believe, a 6.5mm switch, and the reason being is that this first run of the Kite circuit sword, the button's too small, it doesn't make it through this hole in the side. So what we're also going to do is use some 3D printed parts to mount things up. Rather than sticking this in here like this and doing all the crazy angles and hot gluing the heck out of it or epoxying it, we're going to use Hoolyhoo's power button bracket here that he made. And this is pretty cool. You just slip that in there, attach your power board like so, and screw this in. It also has this little leg piece right here, this little teeny thing that goes on the very top of this, and that's as a brace for the back button, because what you're going to do is you're going to remove this back button and we're going to actually solder in a newer back button. But part of the problem too is this back button sits so high that it won't fit through the hole, so we need to actually kind of lengthen it a little bit. So what we're going to do is we take this guy here and we're going to actually just take the legs, and we're going to take two of the legs. It's kind of hard to see. We're going to take two of these legs and just bend them straight. And then I'm going to use some pliers to kind of just flatten the leads completely. And get my soldering iron turned up, because we're going to need him. And then the other legs, we actually just clip the two on the other side. So we just clip and clip. And there you go. So now you've got a lengthy power button. Now what we're going to do now is remove the original button, and this is where I'm going to show you one of my favorite tools, which is this fancy Hoolyhoo desoldering vacuum iron here, and that's a was FR300. They're pricey, but I do a lot of rework for other types of retro equipment and things, and so I wanted something that removes capacitors and everything super easy. That's a fantastic tool. You probably won't have one of those, so what you'll have to stick with doing is using good old solder braid, desoldering braid, flux, and iron. But I am just going to take this and pull the trigger. And doesn't quite want to come out yet. Alright, there we go. And there's just like that, it's out. Won't be needing that tool anymore. Okay, so the next step is just kind of figuring out how we want all this to go. So, first off, I'm going to take this board and I'm going to actually mount my board to this bracket. And what I've got here are some smaller screws. What I've done is I've actually taken some of the smaller Game Boy case screws and just clipped them off with a pair of clippers. You can do that because, hey, why not? Why waste those things? I got a ton of them. You just kind of measure the length and then cut them up. That way you don't have to go out and buy different screws. So I'm just going to screw this bracket on in. and that's screwed down. Now we'll just place him in the case like this. Okay, so this is how this is going to fit when it's all done. And it will just need to have a screw put in here to hold it in place. But I am actually going to use a tiny bit of epoxy just because I like things to be very braced. So now what we do is we take our power switch and we're just going to kind of slide him into these holes. And then we just kind of slip that whole thing through the side of this case until we get this button kind of where we want it. And once we have that button in position, I'm kind of using this as a brace here, see? So that's nicely kind of centered in there. We're going to take the soldering iron and get these buttons tacked down. Maybe. Okay. So we did. Now we got our button. Problem is, if you push on this button, what's going to happen is it's going to actually deflect because it's hanging now. It's not mounted very nicely up to the board. And sorry, my dogs are going crazy, so I'm just going to close that door. So that's what this little leg is for, this extra little piece. So now we've actually created this issue where this is kind of stuck in here, right? So we need to just feed our little leg in. And you can see now the leg is going to sit just like this. Now when we push the button, it's nice and firm against that. So personally, if I could find a 6mm button, that'd be perfect. This is like a 6.5. I've got a 5.5, but I feel like the 5.5 was a little too short. This one kind of protrudes a little bit. So, okay, we're good there. Probably what I should have done also before actually putting this in is put the power switch in. So what I'm going to have to do now is just unscrew the board. Because of my mistake. But, you know, not a bad first attempt anyways. So I think I'm pretty happy with the height of that power button now. I've got these screws, I've got this thing here. I'm going to go ahead and actually trim these up really quick. Just kind of clip these edges of these leads off. The reason being is I want these pretty flat because I'm going to put some Captain tape or some tape over it. That way this does not short out anything in the back of the case. So actually the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put a little bit of probably some epoxy in there to hold this in place, and then also, yeah, I guess I'll do that. So I'm going to do the epoxy and then I'll come back just because I don't want to burn up tons more time here, but basically a little bit of epoxy in the back and here, and I'm going to set it right in this hole there. Alright. Okay, so we are back. The epoxy's dried. The power switch is nice and secure, works really well. So what I'm going to do now is also just kind of note that I put some electrical tape over the connections here, and that's just to protect things from shorting out, because the clearance between this and the USB-C port is pretty tight in the case. So next up we need to take our this side port board, which is your USB and HDMI port, and we'll take this connector that's got the power connector, we'll leave it plugged in, and it also has the wires, and these wires are for left 2, rear button, left 1, and ground. So I'm not going to use left 1, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to snip this pretty short. And I'm not going to cut it all the way off because just in case I want to come back to that later, and if I want to install a bigger bracket, better bracket for the rear, I can, but you know, probably won't ever do that. The other buttons, the other half, so now that leaves me with left 1, right, L1. I want R1, which if I plug this thing in the right way, R1 is also yellow. So we're going to do the same thing with the red wire here, just clip. Okay. So So then what we're going to want to do is kind of test fit this in our case. Gives us an idea of where things go. So this wire is going to plug in over here, and these are going to plug into the center board. I don't want to run this across the cartridge slot. I actually want to kind of tuck this underneath, so I will just tuck this underneath because there's so much space under here we're not even going to use. And then we can do the same thing and bring the other wires up from over here. So now we kind of see this is roughly how our wiring is going to work, and then we're going to have to bring it around to the center. Why the center? Because this is where our button bracket board right here is going to sit. So now what I want to do is, this is Eric G's bracket board mount for Kite's circuit sword mount that he includes. So we just lay that in there, and then you can kind of see this is really nice here. And then we're going to use L1 and R2, so it'll be this side down, right? So it'll be attached like that. So then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually do my soldering. So let's take a look. We have ground, L1, L2, ground, R1, R2. In theory I could have hooked all these up, but we're not using any of these because his board is reversible, so you can have L1, L2, R1, R2, or we're just using the two big ones on the back. So what we're going to do again is just kind of getting a rough idea of how much we want to leave, maybe just like that. And then also bringing this guy up. Let's just clip both these off like that. Okay. Yeah, I know. Well, hasty. Just snip, 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 snip. Grab our flux again. Always love to use flux. Gonna just strip the wires. Okay, so I'm going to just disconnect these boards. I don't need this right now. But the small connector is R1 and the big connector is L1. So, knowing that, let's tin our wires first. And all I'm just doing is painting this no clean flux. And yes, I get my mat dirty, but you know, alcohol takes it all off. So I always wipe this mat down at the end of a session anyway. Just kind of get a nice little ball of solder on here. Just kind of get these guys tinned. And the whole purpose of doing this is just to make sure that you got a nice solid wire to work with and not, you know, a frayed wire or anything. So again, let's look up ground. So we're gonna put this on this side with the 4 buttons showing, because the back side is where the buttons are gonna be through the case. So we're gonna want to do our ground and our L1. So what I'm gonna do is just stick these through this hole very, very carefully and kind of bend the wires back. I'm going to kind of just hold this down and just hit it with some solder. There we go. Just like that. Now we do the same thing here. We got it ground, which is black again. And then R1, which will be the other yellow wire on the smaller connector, as we just talked about. Do the same thing, kind of just hit it with some solder. Okay, looks good. Nice solid connections. Don't yank too hard. Things do come out if you do yank hard enough. Just for safety's sake, just use my side cutter here and just and nip the ends of these off. Okay, that looks good. Now when we put Eric's board in the back and we stick this guy down, we have wires. And then the wires will route nicely to those little connectors that we had already determined. So now the next step with this will actually be to get the buttons mounted in the back. And to do that, part of his kit, actually, which includes this bracket, includes a couple of these little button well center guide drill guides. Again, we're going to take our faithful Sharpie and just kind of make sure that everything is sitting how we want it, because once you're done and there's no forgiveness, right? So I'll make a little mark, put another one of these guides in over here. And just kind of get my head in the way of the camera some more here. Kind of mark it. I'm going to dump those out and I'm going to look and see. They look a little different, so I'm going to take some more time. That one looks good. It was this one over here I didn't like. Okay. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Okay, so now, same deal as the front. Got our step bit and our pilot bit. And again, stick this in here just before you do this, because cutting is forever. Alright, we are good. We'll go ahead and take this little pilot bit, stick it exactly in the Sharpie area. Just kind of drill a little bit by hand. That's this little tiny drill bit I have. I've had him forever. I don't even know what he's for. I think it's a printed circuit board drill bit that I've had forever and a day for making circuit boards. Okay. We got some pilots drilled. Again, I'm just going to kind of check, make sure I likey. That mark is still playing with my head a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our step bit all stuck in there like that. Sit them right down in that pilot hole. Put some serious downforce on this thing. Okay. And we're almost through the back. Okay, let's see, we got our first cut. Ooh, throwing things everywhere. Okay, got a hole. Kind of look at this hole here. Kind of crazy. Looks a little high. It's okay though. So we're going to do this guy here. We'll just, on the back side, start to the next step. And one more step. And one more step. Okay. And that's not quite it yet. One more, right? Because can't quite fit the button in the hole. Okay, looks good. One buttonhole. And it lines up pretty nicely with the bracket. So not too far off from what I wanted. Alright. Side B. Same deal. Okay. Got that bit through the hole now. There we are. Come around the back side. Yeah, these bits do a nice job, even just by hand. I can't even imagine what would happen if you actually were to attach this to a power drill and do this. It would, yeah, it would probably not be a pleasant experience, to say the least. Okay. That's a nice hole too. Kind of hit it a little bit for some countersinking there. Maybe kind of put your finger in there and clean out the burrs. And look at that. I think that looks good. 2 holes. And they're pretty close to each other. They might just be a slight bit off, but I mean not very noticeable. So then we can drop these buttons in. Maybe. And then look at that. Okay, we got our rear buttons. Okay. So now we can clean up our mess. The next step now is we need to do several things. Is preparing some silicone pads for these buttons. So we need to have some silicone pads that are going to attach to these points right here. So we have to take a dual pad here and cut it in half. So that's exactly what I do, right? I'm going to take this thing and just snip it in half. Snip. Alright. And I guarantee you, you'll be like, oh, it doesn't fit. Yeah, no, it doesn't fit yet, because you got to kind of clip around here, so kind of got to make it circular almost. This is where one of those round pads would be really nice. And you could probably get those from some other consoles. But now you can see that lays in there really nice. And we can attach it. Can we attach it? We can attach it. Cool. Alright, also important, these have ridges. So you've got to de-ridge them. So you just take your razor blade and very carefully go around the edges of the ridges and take all the ridges off. Alright, so I'm going to skip ahead to the next part here where I actually have this done, just to save some time. Okay, so we cleaned up these pads, made them nice and round, got rid of all the ridges. Also, I also want to mention on the buttons. Remember we did the hole punch thing earlier, and we took some hole punches and out of the original screen lens, and so we did that and put one of those little pieces inside each one of those buttons. You need to do that on these back buttons, otherwise they will not work properly. So let's be floppy. Alright, so we get the pads installed now. So now we actually lay the board down. And we want to screw that board to that piece there. And I made another one of those really tiny screws by clipping it. So we're just going to take this little dinky thing here and carefully remove everything in place and screw this center board down. Okay. It is now a button sandwich. If we're holding this button board down now, you can hear the buttons, they sound good. They stick up real nice. Okay. So the next step you do with this is you actually got all these other little tiny 3D printed parts. The rest of it are these two little side brackets and these two little caps. One thing to note about these caps is when you're using this sideboard that comes with the Kite board, normally he gives you these two spacers that you actually have to solder on here to stack them up to give you height. If you're using this back kit, you don't need that because these caps actually act as your spacer. So you just drop this piece down in here. Drop that piece down in there. So they're nice and secure. We put the caps on. Well, we put one cap on at least. Okay. Alright, and we're going to take one of these short screws. Let's screw this in here. Okay, that's nice and secure. Okay, so for the next cap, this one's a little trickier because we actually put the cap on it, but then we don't screw it in yet because we got to put the sideboard in. So let's move our wires down below here. Let's move this wire kind of up, over and around underneath that peg. And we'll take this board and this will fit nicely under here. I'm forgetting steps and making a mess, so I'm going to take this peg back out. But what I need before I do this, because once this is in here it'll be a pain in the butt to get to, we'll take this ribbon cable, flip this door up, insert this ribbon cable in here nice and firm with the blue side up, and then close the door down. Make sure it is straight, because if it's kind of off center it will not work properly. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. Lay this down here. Oops, cap goes in first. Now I'll lay that down in there. Okay. Alright, and we put our screw in there. Okay. Now we got our sideboard in, we've got our backboard in. Now these are nice and firm, right? Because they are secured. You can hear a little crunchiness if you hit them at the angle too much, and that's just because they're hitting the plastic. You can smooth things out a little bit more if you don't like that, but as long as you're nailing them dead on, you're fine. Okay, and then of course the next step is you got to get this connector in here plugged in. So I'm just going to do that. Somehow. This is where you wish you had really tiny fingers. Okay. Here, a nice satisfying click. It's clicked in. This one goes into here. That should just kind of click in. Yep, same deal. Now you got this excess wire here. I'm just going to kind of tuck it behind here and then probably hot glue or tape that down at some point. And this little dude gets plugged in to the bottom. Alright. Probably actually better to have these plugged in before you actually screw everything down, because otherwise they are very challenging to insert. But they can be done. Okay. Again, just kind of tuck that wire back below there. Alright, so they're nice tucked in. You got rear buttons. Okay, at this point we've got the back side done and the front side done. So back, front, I mean, really all we have to do now is connect this piece to here, close it up, and have some fun. So that's going to be my next step. I'm going to show that, and then I'll insert the battery in here, and away we go. Alright, we're back, and now this is the last part of part 4, which will be taking the front and back and actually putting it together and doing some tests. And then after that, I'll make another part in the near future after I get a few little detail things, so I can just show the very final just detail work. But what I want to do really quick before we kind of button this together is just talk about a couple quick things. You can see I've got the back and the front already connected together with a ribbon cable. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the Kite circuit sword board, is that's all you connect between the two halves. I mean, this thing basically at this point looks almost professional. So I'm going to put this down, but the Pi compute module here, and then right here that I'm showing, I don't have a heatsink on here yet, and I'm just waiting for some of my heatsink tape, adhesive tape, thermal adhesive tape to get here. You can get his kit with a fan, and what normally you get is this heatsink that he gives you, and you affix it right here on the Pi, and then you can mount the fan right here. Or you can get now, like Hoolyhoo makes a fake cartridge that goes here that you mount the fan that blows the air out. I'm going to try fanless just because I'm not using a whole lot of emulators that require a ton of power, and so I want to just give that a shot first. And if it becomes a problem, then I will add the fan. And I am actually going to print up Hoolyhoo's cartridge and put it in there just in case. Just because I want a cartridge with vents to vent out the hot air anyways, even if I don't have a fan. And so what I'm going to do is get that done, and that'll be kind of my, like I said, my final video, which is detail work. But when I do get my heatsink adhesive tape, I'm going to take this larger, like I said earlier, this kind of 25 by 25 by 5 heatsink, and I'm actually going to mount it just down here, the same exact distance as the original, but down here, so that way a fan can still fit. But this gives me almost 4 times the heatsink area, so it should do plenty of cooling. But alright, so we got some tape on here, we've got some tape over here, just kind of to keep things from possibly shorting out, because these do pretty much touch when this goes together. So let's go ahead and we literally just take this, fold it together, and that is what we're gonna have a final assembly that looks like. You can see on the back I cut that notch out for the battery a little bit more so you can insert it and plug it and unplug it. So screw wise, we need the 2 kind of case screws for the battery door. So we'll just take that area, or that screw, and put those in. I think in a lot of cases this holds most of everything together. I mean, most people, when they're building their own Gameboy Zero, a lot of times they only have these two screws and then the top two screws. So now we've got these two and these two. So for that, I have some machine screws. They're metric, they're M2s, and I've got two different lengths, and I can't remember off the top of my head what they are anymore. I think these are like 4 and these are 6s. So the reason being that we need two lengths is we don't want to break through the Hoolyhoo bracket, and these require a longer screw to get in to the actual threads and these don't. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the larger screws in the middle. I think Hoolyhoo, if you buy his bracket, he gives you screws and you just clip them to whatever you want lengthwise. Alright. Our little snap, that's just the plastics all kind of gelling together. And it takes a little bit because they're pretty deep screws. Okay. And we just got to do the top. And you'll notice the top there's a tiny bit of a gap. And that goes away once you get the screws in. That's actually one of the reasons I wanted to epoxy everything in, because by epoxying everything you can crank down the screws pretty good and the bracket doesn't kind of pull its way loose. I noticed that if you have a hot glue in there, it does work, but eventually it kind of gives up a little bit of that, and you know, lets the bracket kind of flex out. So the epoxy is definitely more permanent. Alright. Okay, there we are. Nice and secure. This thing feels good, solid. Alright, so we got everything, you know, everything's nicely lined up. Alright, so now finally you just stick a battery in here. And this is the 125050 battery, not the 125054. It's a little bit smaller, still 4000 milliamp. It comes with a JST connector. I did mention earlier you have to reverse these leads. Normally you get the negative and positive. They're the other way around, and that's not good. You don't want to plug that in like that. That will break things. So what I did to reverse it is I literally took a thin bladed screwdriver, and I'll see if I can get this right up in this camera, and I pried these little tabs right here, these little white tabs, and while I was prying it, you pull one lead out, do the next thing, and then you can just insert the lead on the other side and insert the red lead on the other side, and then you're done. So I've already reversed this. Again, make sure you do that. And this, it gets in there. It's just it's a little tight, but in theory you can remove this now without having to disassemble. So battery goes in just like that, and it just sits in here. And like I said, we'll need to get some foam in here or something to actually kind of brace it. But for now, I just took a little cardboard wedge just to kind of hold it and button it together. Alright, I've already preloaded my Kite card with the Kite circuit sword image and some games and things, so let's turn it on, take a look. Get our Pi, boot, and Retropie. It initializes the overlay, and at first everyone's like, oh, the battery's empty. It's like, no, it's not, just the initializing. There you go, we're up. If you're used to a Zero, a Gameboy Zero, you've got about a 40 to 50 second boot time. This thing is about 15 seconds. As you see, it's much quicker. But, you know, as you can see, everything's working. So we'll just go in and, you know, make sure all of our buttons work. And, you know, I've already did the button config. I mean, that's one thing I did during testing. I didn't show that, but I already, you know, assigned all the buttons. Alright. So, I don't know. Batman Returns. Why not? You can hear the volume. If you want to turn it up, you can use this switch that we made. Just hold it up like that, and it gets louder. You can also use his hold the mode button down and go down for volume down or volume up. Like I said, the digital volume control works, but it's a little slower. You know, you can't just quickly like up and down like you can with analog. But so there we go. I just exited back, but as you can see, it works, and it works well. I'm very happy with it. Like I said, just need to do the detail work, which will be getting my fake cartridge in there with vents, and then putting my stickers on everything, and making a decal for the front. But there we are. So thanks for watching, and I will eventually go ahead and post that last kind of detail work. But that's the project, and I guess hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. And I think you should definitely build one of these if you get a chance. I think it's probably one of the best types of Gameboy Zeros you can build. It's fast, it works so well, and it's very well put together. Alright, have a good one.